Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. So today, an exciting day in a way, disappointing for many, a lot of questions to be asked. Apparently, today is the day that Bryan Kohberger, who we've been covering since November 13th, 2022, in the horrific murders of the Idaho Four, as they've been called, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Ethan Chapin, and Azana Knodel. And we've all been following this case. And Judge Hippler, the judge who made a lot of tough decisions in this case, and of course using case law to make these decisions, I think that is what pushed the defense, Ann Taylor and her defense team, to approach Bill Thompson sometime last week and consider this plea deal. And there is one reason why, and you may be against the death penalty, but there is one good reason to have the death penalty on the books. And in this case, it demonstrates that because it acted as a bargaining chip. Bryan Kohberger and most defendants don't want to be put to death. So the prosecution used the death penalty to bring the defense to the table and to negotiate. And the defense had no cards. They had no aces. They had no kings. They had no queens. They had to go there humbly towards Bill Thompson. And look what they're getting in return, or allegedly getting. It'll be determined by Judge Hippler. Life, 4 sentences of life without parole, an additional sentence for burglary. And for that, Bryan Kohberger does not receive the death penalty. So we will see today, and we're going to talk about this case up until the hearing at 1 p.m. Once it goes live, we're going to go to the courtroom and we're going to watch the proceedings inside the courtroom and see what happens in this case. We all want to know, and we're going to discuss some of the possibilities. So, folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your cup of coffee. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball in full swing and football season around the corner, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting. From Major League Baseball to UFC to tennis and NFL futures, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Head to the website today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. BetOnline. The game starts here. Joining me today, I'm very privileged to have retired NYPD Sergeant, Professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Bill, good to see you. Thank you for having me on this day.
Well, you know, Mike, you missed last night's show, and I know you wanted to be there, something awful, but, you know, life sometimes gets in the way, and you actually do have a life, so you were able to get the night off last night. Yeah. Mike, you're as surprised about this as everyone else is. But when you think about it, we discussed this from day one, November 13th, 2022. That's when this horrific crime was committed, the murder of these 4 beautiful students, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Azana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. And once the arrest occurred on December 30th, 2022, We followed this case diligently, and we listened to all arguments, guilty, not guilty. And we being experienced law enforcement officers, had a lot of problems with it too. We were baffled by the fact that they didn't find blood in his car. They never recovered the murder weapon. And the evidence that they had, the real most powerful evidence, the touch DNA on the button of the knife sheath, we were satisfied with that. But many people still are unsatisfied with that. So some of the talking heads and the brilliant people that have been brought on these TV stations in regards to this case, and I always point to Matt Murphy, the Orange County prosecutor from California, who on News Nation on Elizabeth Vargas said, the evidence against Bryan Kohberger is overwhelming. Despite that, people still believed that Bryan Kohberger is innocent. We never felt that way. We felt he was guilty as all hell. And once the evidence was presented to us, and I still believe that. So this outcome, and many people are annoyed at it, but to me, an experienced law enforcement officer, you never know what a jury is going to do. And the jury may look at OJ. There's a typical example. The jury may look at slam dunk evidence and disregard it. But I said it last night, one in the hand is always worth two in the bush. And when they have a defendant willing to plead guilty and take life without the possibility of parole in exchange for not getting the death penalty, I think it's a no-brainer for the state. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, I think a lot of people don't realize that probably statistically 90% of all criminal cases actually end in a plea bargain of some sort for some amount of time. But as law enforcement officers, we talked about this numerous times over the course of the last 2 years, that as we are coming to trial, we've mentioned it, that the possibility of some sort of plea negotiation. And I said there's probably starting, a year ago, there might have been talks between Bill Thompson and Ann Taylor. They've known each other for years, informal talks. She made all of her motions, everything she could. She threw it all on the table, zealously advocating for her client's interests, which is her ethical obligation to do. And he probably rebuffed her a number of times. When it was all over and she knew she had lost every single hand he threw out there because of Judge Hippler ruling, then at that point, it got real serious. Bill, as remember, you talked about this numerous times, Bill Thompson was sitting back because he had all the cards. He had house money. And so he knew where this was going. So I was surprised, but I was surprised at how quickly it came. And I will have to tell you, I'm glad it's come to this point. And I think Bobby Chacon and you are right. Take what you've got and don't go out there and go to trial. You might go to trial and still win a conviction, but you might not get a death penalty. It has to be unanimous. You might get one juror that says, yeah, he did it. And I agree, he did it, no problem. I got it, but I don't like the death penalty. And he's just going to get life behind bars without possibility of parole anyway. And, you've used up all those resources and you've put the family through all that agony of that trial. I think this is the best outcome.
Mike, I don't care about the resources. I don't care what it costs the state. Any amount of money is worth it to charge this savage that killed these 4 students. And do I think he deserved the death penalty? 100%. But I understand the criminal justice system. I understand the risks of taking this to trial. I understand juries. And Steve Gonsalves, he is the most outraged that Bryan Kohberger is not receiving the death penalty. What is the responsibility of the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, in conferring with the families? And I believe I know the answer to that, and I'm just going to ask you that. But I believe it's that he just has a responsibility to notify them and to let him know his thoughts and why he chose to accept this plea deal. And some of the reasons are the reasons we just enumerated, is that the risk of a jury, even with all this evidence, of getting a not guilty, finding not guilty after a trial. The other part of that, part B, is that A death penalty is never a short thing anyway.
That's right.
And if Bryan Kohberger was in fact sentenced to the death penalty, there's a good chance it wouldn't happen for 20, 25 years because the appellate division allows endless appeals.
Oh, yeah.
11th hour appeals, as the person is ready to get sentenced to death, all of a sudden it's stayed. So that is another problem. And the families, do they really need that? And look, he has his life. He's going to be in state prison for the rest of his life. But guess what? He's still alive. The alternative is much worse, Mike.
Yeah, Bill Thompson did not have, an obligation to hold a vote for all the family members of the Gonsalves family, the Mogan family, the Knodel family, and the Mogan family. He did not have that responsibility whatsoever. He obviously notified them ahead of time that there was a plea, serious plea, and they were entering into plea negotiations. Probably didn't take very long. He probably only had he maybe only had like 72 hours, the last minute kind of thing that Ann Taylor went to his office maybe last Friday or Thursday and said, let's talk about this right now. I want to talk to you seriously right now. Let's do it behind closed doors. And then he probably notified them. And then he went through with his staff and made up his mind. But he doesn't have to take a vote, and the majority wins. He only had to notify them and of what was going on. And he then conferred, he conferred with his staff, very intense, because I'm sure there was a lot of people saying, Bill, don't do it. Let's just go. We got this guy 100%. Let's just nail him. And he's been around a long time, and they discuss it. It's no matter what you do, it's going to be an emotionally draining decision, and the families have the right to express their outrage, but they don't have like an official role to play in affecting the outcome. They're only notified of the outcome. I hope that they took, the Bill Thompson took their feelings into consideration, but he doesn't really work for them. He works for the state, and he has to do what's in the state's best interest, and also balancing that against the victim's interests and their views of justice. So therefore, there's that balancing act. You can't just say what's the state's best interest, what's the family's best interest, the victim's best interest, but he's got to balance them all and come to one Solomonic decision, and this is his decision.
Well, that's a good word, Solomonic. I never heard that word before.
Threw that one in there.
That's why it shows that you went to law school. I would have never even. I don't even know that word. Anyway, one of the things that I want to talk about also, and it's different in New York than it is in Idaho, and we're going to find out what Idaho law is shortly. And it's something called an allocution.
Right.
In New York, a person that's accepting a plea deal and pleading guilty has to admit guilt for every single charge, and they have to tell their criminal intent also. Did you intend to kill that person? Because they don't want down the road the person to say, oh, I had the knife, it slipped, I fell on the person and killed them. No,
right. They
have to spell that out, because this is clearly a plea of guilty without the possibility of parole and without the possibility of an appeal. So the skill of the judge in questioning the defendant is also very important here. They have to get rid of any possibility that he has any grounds for appeal and let him know that. You're doing this of free mind and free body. No one forced you to do this, did they? They have to get him to answer that. Did your lawyer say you were going to get some deal where you would get paroled someday? No, they did not. So he has to clear all of that off the playing field, because there's also a lot of people out there, and I don't know why I mentioned this. I just threw this whole case. I think we were and Phil, the three of the sane people that covered this case. There's a lot of nutcases out there covering this case on YouTube, and they still are. They're still not accepting the fact, even though he's going to plead guilty, someone's forcing him. The conspiratorial people. It's ridiculous. I shouldn't even care about them, but to me, it's annoying, because most of them have zero credentials and they're talking just like the keyboard warrior that they are. So some of the things, the allocution is very important. The other part is, of course, and I think if you looked at someone in this case whose work and whose accountability and whose knowledge sort of pushed the envelope for the defense to request, it's Judge Hippler. And Judge Hippler, in my opinion, ruled correctly in all of his rulings, and not all of his rulings were easy ones. The DNA, yes, I'm allowing that in. They tried to get the DNA thrown out. Imagine Ann Taylor had gotten the DNA thrown out. She'd be a hell of a lot. She would never be taking this plea right now.
That's right.
How about the fact that she didn't get a stay? She didn't get a continuance. That forced her to face the music. 2.5 years of this case from the time this happened. No, you're not getting a continuance. Are you out of your mind? And Judge Hippler had the nerve, or it's the chutzpah, as they say in the Yiddish world, and in our world, they say he had the balls to make that decision that, no, you're not getting a continuance, and so many other decisions that he made that sort of forced the hand of the defense to bring us to this day. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, the Kohberger's plea, I hope it's similar to others that I've seen where he will go through with the judge each and every element of the crime, like say the corpus delicti. Did you intentionally stab someone? Did you do it with what kind of weapon did you have? Did you have a knife? Did you intentionally go into that house in order to go in to commit crimes? And what crimes did you commit? Did you murder Zana? Did you murder Madison? Did you do it with a weapon? What kind of weapon was it? It's got to be unequivocal. There cannot be any room for legal maneuvering or twisting in the English language into a pretzel later on in a plea somewhere. He gives up all rights to every single plea he could ever possibly have. And Judge Hippler, I hope, will question him at great length about every single nuance of every single crime against all 4 of those poor children that were killed that day. And if he does that, and I think he will, because he doesn't seem like the kind of judge that'll say, okay, do you plead guilty? Yes. Okay, boom, we're going to have sentencing next month. Okay, and it's a 5-minute court appearance. No, I think he's intent on making sure that this case is symmetrically sealed, and there's no possible way for Kohberger ever to expect to see any sort of legal recourse, any sort of parole, any sort of time, any sort of hearing in any court, state or federal, anywhere ever again.
Mike, 2 questions I want him to ask, and I don't know if he will. What everyone, of course, wants to know, and we all know it's not an element of the crime. We all want to know motive.
Right.
Why did you do this? Will the judge ask that? I don't know. Doubtful. I would love him to ask that.
Yes.
And get an answer, to hear it come out of this psychotic piece of shit's mouth. Sorry, I went back to my copper days. The other thing is, I would like Judge Hippler to ask, where's the knife, Brian?
Right.
What'd you do with the knife? Because when he admits to possessing and disposing of that knife, will that get a lot of these pro-burgers to say, oh, he really did do it? I would love them to be able to recover this knife. I don't know if that's a possibility, but these are some of the questions that would really slam the door shut. And it's not important that the whole rabble that believes he's innocent, it's not important that we speak to them. It's important that we speak to the families of these kids. And they want to know what happened, and they want to know why. Will they ever know that? Will they ever know the why? But this is who the prosecution is working for. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. He's speaking, as Vernon Gebreath in the great book Practical Homicide Investigation says, we work for God. And he's referring to the investigators of murder cases. Right. And in a very big way, prosecutors work for God too, because they're working for these people who cannot speak for themselves. These 4 people that were 20 and 21 in November 13th, 2022, who had everything to live for, whose lives was stolen from them, whose families lost a son in the case of Ethan Chapin, and 3 families lost daughters. Their lives snatched from them by this psychotic who you see in this Kohberger, And, to many people, this was a really exciting true crime case. But to the families, this isn't about true crime. This is about the loved ones that they lost.
Yeah, Bill, I'm hoping I'm hoping Judge Hippler will ask the why, because I've seen allocutions like the BTK killer, and he explained why he did what he did. And I thought that was good for people to really understand. I would love to have for Judge Hippler, and I think he could. I think he might, and say, look, don't get cute with me. I'm going to ask you, why did you do this? And I know how. We're going to talk about how, but we want to know why. I want to know why before I impose sentence, because Hippler does not have to accept the plea deal. At the end of it all, he does not have to accept it. So I'm hoping he asks why. And when we're all done, and that will give some sort of relief to the family, a little bit, not much, but a little bit. And then when we're all done, I would love it if it would be possible if Chief Fry and all the investigators would get together and have a press conference, and then let everyone know the quantity, the amount of evidence they got, of all things, a cell phone, you name it. I would like them to let's publicly know in some sort of paper or a press conference to give the cops some sort of real acknowledgement of how much the depth and breadth of evidence against Kohberger. I would like to see that. Just as a cop, I'd like to see that too.
100%. Kami from the chat, thank you for the $2 super sticker. Psychotic, agreed, a mic drop moment. Look, I'm just telling you who he is. He's a psychotic. And I don't soft pedal this stuff. If you want people that soft pedal it, go on the channels that have no credentials whatsoever. They never did this kind of work before. I've seen the bodies. I've pulled murderers out of their bed at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I understand this. So if you want it delivered to you on a softer scale, you're in the wrong place. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button, because that helps our algorithm. Share us with your friends and your family. If you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And you can join our YouTube channel, as I see many people have. Doug Ross just gifted 1 Police Off the Cuff membership. Doug Ross, thank you so much. Very much appreciated. We give certain other coverage, other spiffs, you might say, to our channel members, and we appreciate all of them because they absolutely help us to keep this channel going. It's not free to keep this going. Doug Ross, again, thank you so much. Very much appreciated. I think that this is like an emotional time for not just the families, and of course, mostly the families, but also people that are from Moscow, Idaho. Let's not pretend that this murder case turned that community upside down. Many people that had nothing to do with this were accused to be the perpetrators, and specifically people that were close to the victims. How horrible is that? A lot of the coverage, talking about, oh, this guy did it, that guy did it, all nonsense, all total nonsense, But of course, we would love to hear what Bryan Kohberger's motive was. And we don't know the extent, and we'll find that out shortly, of the allocution. What is Judge Hippler going to make Bryan Kohberger, or not make, what is he going to ask him that he will answer? Kevin Callahan, thank you so much for the £5 super sticker. Very much appreciated. Thank you all. I see a lot of new names in the chat. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Join the Police Off the Cuff family. I want to go quickly to Bryan Kohberger. They've covered this case from the beginning, and I think out of all the channels, they did an outstanding job.
By her renowned forensic psychologist, Dr. Catherine Ramsland. As you may know, she was Bryan Kohberger's professor and advisor at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. She has not spoken publicly about Bryan Kohberger until now. She's been on this show talking about other cases, but she's been very, very careful not to talk about Kohberger because of the trial, because she was going to be a witness at the trial, and she now feels comfortable to open up to us. And we've got so many questions, Dr. Ramsland, that I've got so many questions I've wanted to ask you for so long. I want to start with, how did you first meet Bryan Kohberger? What classes of yours was he in?
Okay, I want to be just clear that I'm still within the FERPA limitations. that protect students and student information. So I will talk within that. I met him in the fall of 2018 when he came to DeSales University. He had an associate's degree, and he was going to get into our 4-year program as a psychology major. He selected the forensic track, which made him an advisee for me because I managed the forensic track. And he was also in my class that semester.
And Dr. Elmelson talks about FERPA. I should have mentioned that there's a law, it's a federal law, I believe, that she is not allowed to talk about certain aspects of a student, their grades, certain parts of their academic life. It's almost like a HIPAA. So she's going to tell us what she can, but unless Bryan Kohberger signs off, she's legally not allowed to talk about certain elements of his academic career. So just keep that in mind if there's some things that Dr. Ramsland can't answer. What was your perception of him?
He seemed like eager to be in the classroom. He was polite. He was respectful, intense, and curious. And there was no reason for me to think that he was anything other than someone who was really interested in this potential career.
Was there anything looking back now that was strange about him or that you noticed?
When I look back, there really isn't anything that stood out to me. I think when you're a teacher, your instinct is to accept students at face value. You don't, start with suspicions or, and there really weren't any red flags. He was always really quite respectful and grateful. He would thank me for things. He was attentive. He would do the work. I didn't have any concerns.
I think it was 4 classes that you taught him in. What were those classes?
There were 3 undergraduate courses in the forensic track that I taught, and he was in all of them. Well, one was Introduction to Forensic Psychology. Another was my death investigation class, which was called Psychological Sleuthing. And the third one was called Dangerous Minds, the Psychology of Antisocial Behavior. And then he got into the graduate program in criminal justice for a master's degree. And he took a course with me called Behavioral Criminology.
I don't want to spend all that much time on this. Jolene, thank you so much for the $5 super sticker. All you new people in the chat, thank you so much. Let me get quickly to another one. I just want to thank you guys. Grateful. Thank you so much for the $10 super sticker. Bill and Mike, I always appreciate and trust your input. Thanks for all you do to explain things and help us see a little deeper into this case. Wishing you both a wonderful and safe July 4th and vice versa. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. One of the things that begs to answer the question, and here's Catherine Ramsland, did Bryan Kohberger go into this field for the very purpose of murdering someone? That is a question that has to be asked, because many people look at this as, this sort of like sexy story of, there is no doubt in my mind that Bryan Kohberger, if not caught, would have turned into a serial killer. This was not a one-off. This wasn't going to be the first time he did this. He had all the traits of a serial killer. And that question I would like to ask you, Mike. Do you think that he was in this, studying to be a criminologist because he was somehow wanted to learn how to beat the system, how to beat the police, how to beat an investigation? He almost got away with this.
Yeah, Bill, it's definitely within the realm of possibility because he did take courses at the Monroe Technical Institute, I think it's called, about law enforcement. And he wanted to know all the technical aspects of crime investigation. And I think he had some sociopathic tendencies. I think he was dealing with some bullying behavior he had dealt with. I think he wanted, this is from a police officer's point of view, not a psychologist, but I think he wanted to know how he could get back at people without getting caught. And I think this was something that he pursued And I think he was probably an excellent student because he probably absorbed as much as he could, read as much as he could, was attentive as much as he could. Because I think in the end, this was all to do with getting away with murder, getting revenge on people in society, and getting away with it. I think that's what it was all about. I think that's definitely within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, and to me that's pretty disturbing. It's like he sort of admired Ted Bundy, almost like modeled himself after that, studying serial killers. That remember that survey he did asking people about crime and how they get away with crime and what they do. So it certainly indicated that he was a student of a would-be. He wanted to be a criminal, and he was studying how to get away with it. And that's, these poor students. So Bryan Kohberger, just to go over it for you, maybe some of you guys that are new in the chat, he was a former criminology PhD student at Washington State University, and he was arrested in December 2022 and charged in the fatal stabbings of 4 University of Idaho students who you see on the screen: Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. The plea deal today hopefully will happen. Kohberger will plead guilty to all charges, receive 4 life sentences, and waive all rights to appeal. He will also receive the maximum penalty for burglary. And burglary, for those that don't know, it's frequently mixed up with robbery. The definition of burglary is to knowingly and unlawfully enter or remain in a building with intent to commit a crime therein. And there's certain, I memorized that word for word, I'd never forget that. And there's certain aggravating factors in burglary that will raise it to a burglary first degree. Certainly, this is a burglary first degree because there's an underlying felony of murder with this burglary first degree. So that's burglary. Why now? Many people ask, why is this plea happening now? And that's really a great question, because legal analyst Slade Kohberger's defense team had lost multiple pretrial motions, including efforts to exclude DNA evidence and to remove the death penalty from consideration. And what was the reactions of the victims' families? Some families, including that of Kaylee Gonzalez, have expressed anger over the plea, saying they were not adequately consulted. The plea hearing is scheduled for today, July 2nd, at the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho, and sentencing is expected later in July. So we're expecting that the hearing to occur today at 1 p.m. There's all kinds of media there, national media, print media that wants to report on this, media that is just as shocked. And one of the other things that I think we need to speak about is the publicity that this case got. And a lot of the publicity, of course, was not wanted publicity. In fact, Judge Hippler has threatened to, or may have even appointed, a task force to find out who leaked the information to Dateline NBC so that they could do their documentary that occurred a few weeks ago, complete with information that was never released out there. So now also, the first book that came out was by Howard Bloom, who wrote a book about this before. He wasn't counting on the fact that it would take 2.5 years for this case to go to trial. In addition, there's another documentary coming out, Prime TV. So all this publicity, and the best-selling author is also what's his name again, Mike? Patterson is coming out with a book in July. I'm sure he was looking at big dollar signs. This will certainly put a dent in how his book sells now that this is coming to fruition, that he's pleading guilty. So yes, James Patterson. So all of this publicity it was unwelcomed, especially in a case where the judge and the previous judge had slapped a gag order. That was Judge John's judge from Moscow, Idaho, who initially slapped a gag order, and Judge Hippler followed through with that. So they're not amused that all of this information got out there. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, the publicity surrounding this is amazing, but we've seen this sort of thing before. Just take a look at the OJ case. And I always like that case was over 30. That was case about 30 years ago now. I was in law school at the time taking an evidence class, and we used to talk about that every single day. But you remember the Bronco chase with the helicopters and the police chasing his car. There was all kinds of information coming out about the investigation, and both sides, I think, took part a little bit in manipulation, trying to manipulate people's perceptions, the press's perceptions, with maybe little minor leaks here and there. But that was totally out of control. I think this was tremendous amount of publicity in the beginning, but then once John Judge slapped on the original protective order, keep everything sealed, all that publicity went away. And I think it was remarkable that for about 20 months, 18 months, there was really very little coming out about this case. But in the spring, it all started to bubble to the surface, because every time Ann Taylor challenged something, the witness, the prosecution's evidence, the prosecution had to answer. And every time they answered, you'd look through their motion papers and see all kinds of facts, a cornucopia of facts that you never knew about, and all kinds of evidence that was there, heretofore not even known to the public, suddenly became known to the public. And I think people started to feel a lot better about the prosecution of the case, to say, yeah, we don't think this is probably a big mistake, mistaken identity case. We believe, the right person. But there will always be cases. Every once in a while, a case will catch national attention, and there will be press feeding frenzies.
Absolutely. We spoke about how the families of the victims are not happy about this plea deal. And I want to play a little bit of this, and specifically the Gonsalves family. Steve Gonsalves is livid. I want to play this from News Nation.
Bring in Steve Gonsalves. He is the father of Kaylee Gonsalves. His attorney is Shannon Gray, who has stood by him steadfast from the beginning. Steve, I don't know what to say. You're the first person I thought of when I heard this news today. I reached out to you right away, first to tell you how sorry I was, because I know how this is landing. At least I think I do. But I wanted you to have your say. I wanted you to be able to say out loud for everyone to hear what this means to you and your family.
This is anything but justice. This is the opposite of our will. There was no majority believing that this was acceptable. I want to honor all the police officers, the FBI, and all the people that work their tail off. The failure is at the court level, 100%. But the men in the boots on the ground and the women that were out there working, I want to honor everything that they did for our children, 100%. The fault is in leadership and the people that you place this evidence upon. They were weak. They decided to play God and decide what this man's decision should be, and not a jury, not his peers. They, so that's where we are today.
Walk me through what happened. Brian Enton, did some really great reporting at the top of this show here, but tell me from your perspective how the last 3 days have played out.
I would say ever since Hippler has demanded an independent investigation, they couldn't get away from this case fast enough. They've done everything to make this case go away. So I don't know what that entails, but he said he was going to have an independent investigator, and all of a sudden we seemed like we were on rails to get rid of this case and make a plea deal. I mean, he's guilty. We all know he's guilty. There's more than enough evidence, but it's tough. It's tough to put a community through this, and it could be bad for reputations and business identities, and there's fallout. But this isn't the will of the victims. This is just one person making a decision, and it doesn't reflect what we were asking for.
Steve, did anybody ever call you from the prosecutor's office to just personally discuss this with you? Did anybody offer to meet with you in person to go over this potential plan?
We have meetings all the time on, particularly a lot of times on Friday. No. We had this regular meeting that we have to try basically do an update of what's going on, where things are at, because Idaho is actually an amazing state where it really does care about people. We just get one or two, people who just don't care about the victims and don't care about justice. And it's easy to take the weight out. It's easy to make an excuse and say, I'm doing this for the victims, even though I've never interviewed the victims. I've never really talked to them to find out what their true feelings are.
Mike, as much as I respect Steve Gonsalves, and as much as he's been really the almost like the spokesperson for the unofficial spokesperson for the families, I believe that the prosecution is doing the right thing. I believe Bill Thompson is 100% doing the right thing. And I'm not taking into consideration the cost of this. What I'm taking into consideration is the fact that when you go to trial on a capital murder case, no matter how much evidence you have, you never know what a jury's going to do. So they have a guilty plea. They're going to get 4 sentences of life without parole. Why would the prosecution, why would the state risk it and go to trial for the possibility of the death penalty? It's not even a guaranteed thing, just the possibility.
Bill, you look at Mr. Gonsalves and he's hurting, and I don't blame him. He owns that. That's his. I could never say anything bad about him like you. But I think overall, looking at it from a law enforcement point of view, I think it is the right decision to accept the plea, because what would happen if you did get a conviction and you did get the death penalty sentence? He would be in Idaho State Prison for probably at least 20 years. And then after those appeals, the state appeals, you've got those mandatory state appeals that have to be taken. You then have mandatory federal, discretionary federal appeals. This is easily a 25-year outlook. And so he's going to be doing at least 25 years before you could even put him to death. He is a nobody now. He's going to live in a 6x8 cell. He's going to be scared because he doesn't have any connections in that prison whatsoever. He's not connected to any sort of gang or anything like that. He's all by himself with no support. He's going to be scared to death. I'm not in favor of the death penalty, but if he got the death penalty, I wouldn't feel a bit of anguish for that. I wouldn't lift a finger to help him. But I think that this is weighing all of the possible outcomes. I have to agree with you, Bill. This is the best outcome for everyone concerned. It may not feel, obviously, to the families right now, but this will save them a lot of aggravation and agony in the future, when if he was still alive for 25 years, he'd be making appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal. Now, once he's sentenced, nobody is ever going to hear from this guy ever again.
No, well, I think there's people in the chat asking me do I think that this is the first time
Good question.
he did this, that he ever murdered someone. Hard to tell. I think he has a lot of the criteria. I think he has a lot of the attributes of a serial killer. And had he not been caught after these quadruple murders, I think he would have killed again. Absolutely. So we can look at that and we can thank the Moscow police, the FBI, the Idaho State Police, the District Attorney's Office, Bill Thompson and his investigators, that they made a relatively quick arrest in this case. Mm-hmm. We remember back on November 13th, when this happened, the whole town, the whole state, the whole country in a way was in shock over this. And they made an arrest within 6 weeks. And many of the TV stations were saying, is this a cold case? I was just like cringing. Like, are you kidding me? Should they take this case away from the Moscow police and give it to the FBI? That's not how it's done. The local police department catches the murder case. The FBI may assist, which they have.
Mhm.
And they've probably helped a great deal because they are the ones who did the investigative genetic genealogy that resulted in Bryan Kohberger's DNA being matched to the DNA on a knife sheath, the button of the knife sheath. We know first it was compared to his father because they surreptitiously obtained his father's DNA from some bottles in their garbage. And then once they had that, they did a buccal, BUCCAL swab from Bryan Kohberger's cheek, and they had the match. And that is very, very powerful evidence. So, yeah, I mean, we want to know about all this evidence. I'm sure there's more evidence. We want to know the how, the why. What other evidence did the state have against Bryan Kohberger that we don't know about yet? Will they reveal that? I mean, anyone that's followed this case really wants to know that.
Yeah, Bill, I think you're right. I just think of that picture where he took that selfie about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning of the murders. That's the timestamp on it, which showed his eyebrows. He looked like he just come out of a shower, and he's giving a thumbs up. I think that was him feeling a kind of like a exhausted but adrenaline-filled high. And I think that's it. That's the classic picture. And I think he was really pleased with himself. And I think he probably in the future, if he'd gotten away with this, would want to feel that high all over again. Like the BTK killer, he would have a project and then he would go after it and he would research people and follow them around and plan it out meticulously for several months and scope out the ways to do it, the ways to get away with it. And I think that is his reward, that feeling of I got over. So yeah, I think if he did not get arrested in this case, he would definitely have committed another case in order to get that high feeling again.
You know, I also, we found out very recently that on the morning of the murders, there was at least 2 phone calls to his father. One of them, I believe, was 35 minutes long.
Yes.
Did he confess to his father? We may never, ever find that out. But what was he talking about to his father? What was he speaking about? Because we also realized that he was kicked out of the PhD program at Washington State University. In fact, they defunded him because he was on some kind of scholarship. So what was his life going to be like? He had to get out of there because, well, he knew what he did. And he was no longer a PhD student at Washington State University. So what did he talk about with his father on that morning? We'll probably never find that out. But that's some of the evidence that we learned about that really wasn't out in the public domain until just very, very recently.
Yeah, Bill, I'm just wondering because people have opined that possibly Mr. Kohberger, the senior Mr. Kohberger, may have known about this. And if he did know something that his son did, could he be arrested as like a co-conspirator, like an accessory after the fact? I'm tending not to think that the father knew. I think if he had confessed to his father, I think his father would have said, "We're going to get you an attorney," and that sort of thing. And I don't know of any evidence of an attorney being starting in this case until he actually was arrested and appeared in court for the very first time in Pennsylvania. So I tend not to think he did. I think he probably, as you're talking about this, was explaining to his father that, I've decided to come home. I can't do this. This is not what I want. So I'm thinking, I can't be sure, but I'm thinking he was probably justifying asking his father to come out and helping him move back, to Pennsylvania. That could be totally wrong, but I think that's where he may have had that 30-minute conversation. Maybe his father's saying, "Bryan, please, you're a great student. Come on, buckle down," that sort of thing, like a pep talk from the dad. I'm not sure, but I think that's where Mr. Kohberger's head might have been, because that is a strange phone call to have with your father. I agree. It's a really weird timing the day after, that morning of, 5 hours after you allegedly killed 4 people.
Mike, one of the questions that, and I think a lot of layman type people, like myself, I'm not an attorney. We saw Ann Taylor do some things that, in my mind, as a civilian now, I see as dishonest. and particularly this, the alternate perps. She takes 4 names from the tips log from the Moscow police and was going to present those 4 names as potentially other suspects, other perpetrators in this case, with no evidence whatsoever. And because there was a good judge on this case, he said, no, I'm not allowing this. You have no evidence. You're just going to throw these names out to create doubt. A weaker judge may have allowed that, and it may have been effective because, throwing out 4 names with no evidence, that can confuse the hell out of the jury. So Judge Hippler did not allow that, right? And there was other thing, the continuance is another thing. She knew he was guilty. What the hell is this continuance about? 2.5 years have gone by. You really need more time to go through all of the evidence? Shame on you. You had 2.5 years. And if you didn't have enough personnel, you could have asked the state to provide you with more help. But all of those things, I think, bother us as onlookers, as witnesses to this. And when you look back on it now, you say, I don't like that at all.
Yeah, Bill, being a criminal defense attorney is not an easy job because it's really difficult to defend someone's interests, their constitutional rights, when you know that they've committed the crime. So they have to zealously advocate. That's their canon of ethics. They have to zealously, and the word zealously is written in the canon of ethics. They have to zealously advocate for their client's interests. However, there are some defense attorneys that are overzealous and go well beyond the canons of ethics. Because and I think I lost a lot of respect for her when she wanted to put forth 4 names that have already been investigated, have already been cleared, have already had their DNA tested, and have been totally cleared by the police. And she's been representing this clown, I'll call him a clown now, this clown for 2 years. To me, that's outside the bounds of ethical obligation to her client, because if you're going to make a motion, you're going to accuse somebody, you're going to make an argument, you have to have a good faith belief that your argument, is grounded with some sort of evidence that we could argue about, but at least some sort of evidence. She had nothing. I think that really showed how desperate she was. She was just grasping at straws. This is like the alibi witness. We can't name somebody, but we're going to figure out an alibi witness, an alibi through our cross-examination, our prosecution's own witnesses, because honestly, we think he was out stargazing. We can't prove it in any way, shape, or form, but it went overboard, and I think she lost a lot of respect from people because of that. And certainly for me, she tried hard. She did everything in her power, but I think she went far beyond the scope of her ethical responsibilities in this case.
Mike, I just find it dishonest.
Yeah.
Because basically you're making it up. And how is that okay? You know what I mean?
Right.
And the other question I think everyone will ask you, and I don't know if you'll even answer this because I've asked this before. Do you think Ann Taylor knew that Bryan Kohberger did this?
Yeah. Look, she worked in the prosecutor's office before she became a defense attorney. She's known Bill Thompson for many years. She's probably done dozens of cases. You don't have to be a law enforcement officer to know after seeing what we've seen that he did it. She knew he did it. She knew he did it. But she's doing her ethical obligation of zealously advocating, but I think she went overboard. But yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, she's not stupid. She knows what time it is. She was desperate, but she knows that he did it. In my mind, absolutely 100%.
But can a defense attorney ever admit that?
Not in court, not allowed to.
No, I don't mean in court, ever admit that really anywhere.
Even after the case is over, they are not allowed to admit that. They are, if you asked, I remember seeing an interview regarding the Charles Manson case, the Tate LaBianco killings from like 1971. And I saw an interview on TV years ago with Charles Manson's attorney. And he still refers to, Manson was still alive at the time. He could never, ever admit, he's not allowed to admit that, yeah, I knew all along, the guy did it, the guy's, blah, 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 blah. No, she will not ever be able to answer the question. Did you know, in your heart, did you feel he absolutely did it? Did he tell you he did it? Did he confess to you? You know he did it, didn't you? She cannot answer that question candidly, honestly, with what she knows. She's always going to have to deflect the answer because she's not allowed to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the oath that an attorney takes.
Yeah.
It's sort of
Yeah.
confidentiality. But
Yeah.
I would think, though, some people might have a bout of conscience to realize that, in fact, their client cold-bloodedly murdered 4 kids in their beds, and to zealously advocate for that person, I don't know. Some may have a problem with that. Obviously, she didn't, or she could have withdrew from the case. But I just want to ask the questions that I think people in the audience are asking themselves, and see what your take is on an attorney. You're an attorney, and how do you feel about that?
It's not easy. I mean, because look, everybody's got their feelings. For instance, if you're a defense attorney, you may handle robberies and murders, but you may decline to do, especially if you're a woman, a rape defense because of your feeling. There are some cases I probably could be a defense attorney on, but being a cop for 20 years in law enforcement, and that's my mindset, I'd have a hell of a time doing it. But maybe I could do a decent job. But as a father, if I ever had to defend someone who's alleged to have been a child molester, I would have to pass on that. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. I just could not ever lift my finger to help that person. So we all have to work within our limitations. And a judge would respect that and assign the case to someone else. But it is very difficult because look, once Ann Taylor started getting all of the discovery, she knew he did it. She knew he did it, and she had to put her feelings aside and do what she thought was in her client's interest, and that is to challenge the admissibility of evidence where she thought she had an opportunity to knock that evidence out. And like you said before, I agree with 100%. If she had knocked out the DNA evidence, we wouldn't be here today talking about him pleading guilty. She would go for it at that point. He'd say, let's do it. She'd say, look, we got a really fighting chance now because we knocked out the DNA evidence.
Right.
So yeah, you change one or two little things, it changes the whole scope of how they view the case. But, I think she did go overboard in her zealous advocacy of her client.
Absolutely. I want to play this from Brian Enton.
In just a few hours, Bryan Kohberger is set to plead guilty to quadruple murder on his way to a life sentence, unless Judge Stephen Hippler objects to the deal. And legally, he can do that, but practically, how do you put someone on trial after the whole world knows he agreed to admit that he did it? It is unlikely that he is going to go against the plea deal. In fact, he's probably already signed off on it. What if he were, though, tried and acquitted? If Bryan Kohberger doesn't stand trial, will the whole horrific story ever come out? And if it doesn't, is justice really served? Joining me now is veteran of the Idaho courts, criminal defense attorney Edwina Elcox. In fact, her office is a block away, so we're lucky to have someone who understands this courthouse, this judge. I'm curious what you think about Judge Hippler in terms of, do you think he's going to push tomorrow to get information out of Bryan Kohberger, to get the story, to get the motive, to get the details?
I don't think so. I think if Bryan Kohberger is going to enter a plea, all that he would be required to do is establish the elements of each of the crimes. So where it occurred, the date, obviously the names of each of the victims, and what he did. But as far as requiring him to say why he did this, there's no legal requirement for that.
Do you think the prosecution should have put that in? I mean, why not?
I think it's the question that everybody wants to know, why he did this, or theoretically he did this. I'm sure we'll get our answer on that guilty plea tomorrow, but I think that having him plead guilty is one of the best things that could have happened in this case.
The trial would have been difficult, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there any chance, again, you knowing this community, the judge, that he could not accept the plea?
I don't think so.
Does that ever happen?
The courts can reject plea deals in certain circumstances. But realistically, in this case, the judge can't force the state to pursue the death penalty, right? So if they take that off the table, the sentence that he has, what we hear he's agreed to, is the most significant one that he could get.
You heard Jesse talking about how it angered him, this alternate perpetrators theory that the defense wanted to bring up. The fact that they wanted to bring in these names of people who were innocent. I mean, they were ruled out with fingerprints and DNA. Was that I mean, you're a criminal defense attorney. Did that cross a line? That she wanted to do that?
I don't think proposing the idea of an alternate perpetrator or perpetrators crossed the line. I think you have to do what you need to do as a defense attorney, but clearly there has to be a legal basis, and the court was very clear that the judge did not think that the defense had even remotely met that standard.
You know this community. You know, there's a lot of outrage that I hear about from all over the country. People wanted a trial. They wanted answers. They feel like this is a cop-out. What is the feeling here, even within the legal community?
We're going to go to the courtroom now. Apparently, they are in the courtroom. So let's see if we can go to the live in the courtroom now. I'm trying to find the exact. I'm not finding it yet. Law and Crime is not live, so let me see if I can. Mike, so that's one of the things. Talk about the evidence and how much evidence they had till we find the live court appearance, and is that what in fact convinced the defense to take this plea?
Yeah, Bill, you just think about it, how this all developed. I remember talking about this with you, me, and Phil, and the moment, we had no idea. They had no idea. They had no motive. It didn't seem to be that there was any sort of connection between the four innocent people and any sort of violence that they participated in or anything like that. The first thing we got really was the white Hyundai, and then you develop from there. And it takes a while to get the DNA results back, but they didn't get anything. It was inconclusive for months until they not months for
Mike. I'm going to go to the courtroom now.
Okay, go ahead.
The defense in this case has been trying to get the death penalty stricken for some time now. They filed a number of motions over the last several months asking Judge Stephen Hippler to strike the death penalty. They said that Bryan Kohberger had autism spectrum disorder, and that should make him ineligible for the death penalty. They said that the state of Idaho, the prosecution, fed them a bunch of discovery, 68 terabytes of discovery. If you can't wrap your mind around that number, that's a huge amount of discovery. That is, just think about 68 1 terabyte hard drives, those little cases you could buy at Best Buy, full of information. They were given 68 of those. They said, we can't get through all of this, so you should strike the death penalty. They made a number of different arguments. And then came the Dateline special in May that aired a lot of...
Mr. Thompson, Mr. Horowitz, Ms. Jennings, and Mr. Nye is here as well. Am I miss anybody? I'm sorry.
Ms. Allen is here as well.
Ms. Allen is here as well. Very well, thank you. All right, we are here today to entertain a change of plea. Before I start, I want to address some issues of concern and otherwise. First, I appreciate everybody in attendance today being on their best behavior. Please, no outbursts or demonstrations. Any such conduct will result in immediate removal and may result in an inability to attend further court proceedings in this case. I want to point out that there have been calls by some for the public to contact me and my office in an attempt to influence my decision-making in this case. This has been extraordinarily disruptive for court staff and the ability for them to get work done, not only in this case, but in other cases where defendants are entitled to have their cases processed, and frankly, as important, if not more so, for victims to have their cases processed in those cases. It's also highly inappropriate. A court is not supposed to, and this court will never, take into account public sentiment in making an opinion regarding its judicial decisions in cases. Courts should, and I always will, make decisions based on where the facts and the law lead me, period. I have not read any of the numerous messages nor listened to any of the numerous voicemails that have been sent to me and my staff. Those have all been forwarded to security and, where appropriate, to law enforcement. I ask that you not continue to mount such campaigns or to send me information like this, because, again, it is not appropriate and, frankly, not something I would take into account when deciding a matter in a case like this. I also want people to understand some very basic concepts about the ideas of separation of powers, what the court's duties are, and what the duties and the rights of the executive, or in this case, the prosecuting attorney, is. The executive, the elected prosecutor, is the sole authority in deciding what charges to pursue, including whether as well as what penalties to ask for, and what penalties to pursue, including the death penalty. This court cannot require the prosecutor to seek the death penalty, nor would it be appropriate for this court to attempt to do that. This court, in considering a plea agreement, if it were to reject this plea agreement, cannot force the state to seek the death penalty. My role and power in considering a plea agreement is extremely limited. My role is to ensure that the defendant's plea is given freely, voluntarily, and intelligently. If those things are met, I can only reject a plea, such as the one in this case, where I'm not being asked to agree to the sentence in advance. I can only reject it, for example, if the defendant does not meet or admit to all of the elements of the crime. That is, I can ensure what is called a factual basis to the plea. Finally, I want to offer my apologies to all the families, including the victims' families, the families of the defendant, for the short notice for today's hearing, and I'm sure what must have been the hurried efforts to get here. I, like most everyone else, learned of this plea agreement Monday afternoon and had no inkling of it beforehand. Prior to that time, I was under the belief that this case was proceeding to trial, as had been indicated, and my staff and I were busy continuing to work on preparations to have potentially 10,000 citizens of Ada County come to jury duty starting in mid-July, with the questionnaire process in mid-July. It was, once I learned of the defendant's decision to change his plea in this case, it was important that I take the plea as soon as possible because of the extraordinary administrative efforts that were otherwise attendant to the process of this, getting this trial potentially underway on time, and including the significant process of bringing, again, potentially up to 10,000 jurors to come in and fill out juror questionnaires prior to the beginning of the voir dire process. And so it was important that we, if we're going to go down this road, do so expeditiously so that we can avoid those costs and expenses associated with that. Otherwise, if it was not going to result in a plea, or if for some reason the plea were to fall through today, that we could continue diligently towards trial at the time specified. And so that obviously required that we act quickly. And so some folks may have not had the amount of time that we would otherwise allow for them to travel here. And so, again, I apologize for that. I want to make people aware that during the hearing, if you are to leave the courtroom for any reason, you will not be readmitted during the hearing. Also, when we finish the hearing this morning, I ask that the public and media wait in their seats until the victims' families and the defendants' families and others are escorted out of the courtroom before you start to leave. Finally, I want to acknowledge the trial court administrator and her staff, the Ada County Sheriff, and the Ada County 4th District Marshal Service for the huge lift that they've accomplished in preparing for and orchestrating this hearing today, as well as to all the security attendant today that you see, and some of whom many of whom you don't see, with less than 48 hours notice. And so I appreciate the hard work that they've been doing. Frankly, some of them while they were on some vacation prior to the trial starting and had to call that short. And so I appreciate very much their professionalism and dedication. All right. That said, let's move to the business of today. I understand the state and the defense have reached a plea agreement in this case. For the record, I have a written plea agreement which indicates in sum, the defendant will plead guilty to all 5 counts in the indictment, burglary, felony, and first-degree murder, 4 counts. The state and the defendant stipulate, that is, that the defense is not free to argue for a lesser sentence at sentencing to the following. The defendant on the burglary charge will be sentenced to 10 years fixed, and that the defendant on counts 2 through 5, the 4 counts of first-degree homicide, on each count would receive a fixed life sentence, all 5 of those counts to run consecutive to one another. Defendant, as part of the plea agreement, waives his right to appeal, as well as his right to appeal the sentence and his right to seek leniency or reconsideration of the sentence under Idaho Criminal Rule 35. This is not a Rule 11 agreement, meaning the court is not bound by the plea agreement and could impose a different lawful sentence at sentencing. The stipulated agreement between the parties is the maximum on each count. So theoretically, the only thing the court could do would be a lesser sentence at sentencing. But the defendant is not free to ask the court to do so under the plea agreement. Are there any other material terms of the plea agreement that the parties would like to make? Obviously, the plea agreement, the written plea agreement will speak for itself and be part of the court record.
Not from the state, Your Honor. Thank you.
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, very well. All right. Ms. Taylor, have you had sufficient time to discuss this case and all of its ramifications with your client?
I have, Your Honor.
Have you discussed fully with him his rights, defenses, and possible consequences to him of the guilty plea?
Yes, Your Honor.
Have you been able to do all the discovery you feel necessary?
Yes, Your Honor.
And have you informed your client of the importance of providing the court truthful and accurate answers in taking this plea today?
I have.
Have you apprised your client of any and all offers and counter offers and answered his questions about those?
Yes,
Do you consent to the entry of the plea today?
I do.
All right, Mr. Kohberger, I need to ask you some questions this afternoon, or I guess it's this morning still. I do this to ensure that so that I am assured that you understand the nature of the charges to which I understand you're going to plead guilty, as well as the possible consequences to you of your guilty pleas. I want to make sure your plea is given voluntarily, and I want to make sure that you actually committed the crimes to which you're pleading guilty, because I don't want you to plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit. If you attempt to plead guilty today, but for some reason I don't accept your plea, then it is possible that your statements today could be used against you later at trial. Do you understand that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And now, while you're standing, actually, why don't you take the oath from the clerk?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in the matter not given before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right, and Mr. Kohberger, just to make it easier, you don't need to stand when you speak to me. I appreciate the sign of respect, but for convenience, you can remain seated, all right? Before I start asking you questions today, have you consumed substantive questions? Let me ask you, have you consumed any alcohol, drug, or other intoxicating substance that would impair your ability to understand or exercise reasonable judgment?
No.
You feel like you are thinking clearly today?
Yes.
All right, I want you to understand what the possible penalties are for each of the crimes to which I understand you're going to offer a guilty plea today. They include, on count one, the burglary, a fine of up to $50,000 and a period of incarceration of up to 10 years in the state penitentiary. You may be required to pay restitution to any victims of the crime. Count 2, 3, 4, and 5 for first-degree murder. The consequences include a fine of up to $50,000, a period of incarceration of life imprisonment, which is a requirement of a sentence, that it be a life sentence with a mandatory minimum sentence of at least 10 years on each of those counts. In addition, you would be potentially responsible for a fine of up to $5,000 to each of the victims of your crime, to be enforced in the form of a civil judgment, to operate as additional punishment. This is in excess of any restitution or fines that the court could order. And again, you may be required to pay restitution to the victims of the crime. You would be required to provide, as to counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, a DNA sample and a right thumbprint impression, and potentially pay for analysis of those samples. You would lose any right to possess, purchase, or carry a firearm, the right to serve on jury duty, the right to hold public office, and the right to vote. Do you understand the charges and all those possible consequences?
Yes.
You've heard the plea agreement that I talked about today. Do you agree with that plea agreement?
Yes.
And do you understand the nature of the charges that you've been charged with that I understand you're going to plead guilty today to?
Yes.
As I indicated, I'm not bound by the plea agreement, but the plea agreement is for the maximum on each count. Do you understand that I'm not bound by the plea agreement?
Yes.
Has anyone promised you that I would be lenient or easy on you if you pled guilty?
No.
Has anyone threatened you or anyone close to you to get you to plead guilty?
No.
Is anyone other than the state's agreements with respect to the plea agreement, has anyone promised you anything in exchange for your plea agreement?
No.
Has anyone told you to be untruthful in answering my questions today?
No.
Has anyone offered you a reward of any kind other than the plea agreement in order to get you to plead guilty today?
No.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
And counsel, obviously there have been a number of motions filed to suppress evidence in this case. Other than those filed, are there any other motions that you felt were available with respect to Rule 12?
No, Your Honor.
And Mr. Kohberger, you understand that by entering the guilty plea in this case, you would be giving up your right to appeal any decision this court made, as well as your sentence.
Yes.
Have you had enough time to decide whether or not to plead guilty?
Yes.
Are you pleading guilty freely and voluntarily?
Yes.
Given your choices, do you believe it's in your best interest to plead guilty?
Yes.
Have you discussed fully the matter of pleading guilty with your attorney, and are you satisfied with the advice you've received?
Yes.
Has your attorney advised you to your satisfaction about what your rights are, what your defenses may be, and what the possible consequences to you of your guilty plea are?
Yes.
Has your attorney done everything you've asked them to do?
Yes.
Are you satisfied with their representation of you?
Yes.
I have received a written guilty plea advisory questionnaire that is purported to be filled out by you. Did you fill that document out?
Yes.
Did you understand the questions that you answered in this document?
Yes.
And are the answers that are outlined in this document your answers?
Yes.
Are those answers truthful?
Yes.
Did you sign the document?
Yes.
And this document outlines many of the rights that you have in this case. Should you not plead guilty, did you understand those rights?
Yes.
They include a right to a jury trial. Do you understand that?
Yes.
They include a right to the presumption of innocence. Do you understand that?
Yes.
They have the right to require the state to prove your guilt as to each element beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you understand that?
Yes.
They include a right to confront your accusers and cross-examine witnesses presented by the state, including by utilizing the subpoena power of the court to accomplish that. Do you understand that?
Yes.
You understand you would have a privilege against self-incrimination and a right to remain silent, meaning you would not be compelled to testify if you did not wish to, had you not pled guilty.
Yes.
You understand you're giving up that privilege and those rights that I've just outlined by pleading guilty.
Yes.
All right, I want you to understand what the state would have had to have proven at trial had you, to the crimes that you're pleading guilty to, had you, if you didn't plead guilty. Let me find the document. Hang on a second here. All right. So as to count one burglary, the state would have to have proven that on or about November 13, 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, you unlawfully entered a residence located at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder. As to count two, the state would have had to have proven that on or about that same date in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogan, from which she died. As to count three, the state would have had to have proven that on that same date in Latah County, at that same address, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Gonzalez, a human being, by stabbing her, from which she died. As to count four, the state would have had to have proven that on or about that same date in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing her, from which she died. And then as to count five, also murder in the first degree, that on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing him, from which he died. Do you understand those things the state would have had to have proven?
Yes.
And you understand that by pleading guilty, the state no longer has to prove those things because you're admitting those things are true.
Yes.
I want to also make, for the record, the defendant has provided with the guilty plea advisory form a document entitled Written Factual Basis that purports to have the defendant's signature dated 1 July 2025. Did you sign that document?
Yes.
And did you agree with the written factual basis that is included there?
Yes.
And then let me ask you, did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Gonzalez, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
And then on or about November 13th, 2022, again in Latah County, Idaho, did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
Did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
I would ask the state at this time to provide its recitation of its factual basis had this case gone to trial.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the organization of the recitation is different than what I think the court and the public may be familiar with from the probable cause affidavit and other documents. The state's evidence, as an overview, would show that back in March of 2022, when the defendant was residing in his parents' residence or was residing back in Pennsylvania, his home state, he purchased online a K-bar knife and sheath with an Amazon gift card that he had purchased shortly prior to the purchase of the knife, sheath, and sharpener. Jumping ahead, the end of June of that year, the defendant, Mr. Kohberger, moved from Pennsylvania to Pullman, Washington, which is right across the state line from Moscow, Idaho, for the purpose of pursuing a PhD in criminal justice at Washington State University. The state's evidence would indicate that beginning July 9th of 2022, Mr. Kohberger's phone began connecting to a cell tower that serves the area of the 1122 King Road residence in Moscow, Idaho. Now, I will acknowledge for the court and all present that there are many residences in that area. It's a dense population of mostly college-related occupants. Between July 9th of 2022 and November 7th, the defendant's phone connected to that particular tower during late night, early morning hours, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., on approximately 23 times. Now, I will acknowledge also, we do not have evidence that the defendant had direct contact with 1122 or with residents of 1122, but we can put his phone in that area on those times. In the interim, on August 22nd of 2022, Latah County Sheriff's Deputy Darren Duke conducted a traffic stop in the early morning hour or late evening hours, about 11 p.m. On the west side of Moscow, on the Moscow-Pullman Road. This was a traffic stop of Mr. Kohberger's car, which turned out to be a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plates. During the course of the traffic stop, Deputy Duke was able to obtain Mr. Kohberger's name, Bryan Kohberger, his phone number, and his address, which at that point was an apartment address in Pullman. We then move to the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. The state's evidence would show that early morning hours on that day, Mr. Kohberger's phone left his Pullman residence, which is an apartment in kind of the central northwest part of Pullman. That phone was then subsequently turned off at approximately 2:54 a.m. and remained off until approximately 4:48 a.m. on Sunday, the 13th of November. The state's evidence would include at trial, video surveillance of a business on the Moscow-Pullman Highway, just across the state line from Moscow. It would show a vehicle matching the description of the defendant's Hyundai Elantra entering Moscow at approximately 3:02 a.m. Compiled surveillance that the investigators put together from businesses and residents then show the defendant's car, the white Elantra, as I've described, circling the 1122 King Road area, that neighborhood, starting around 3:30 or so in the morning. Comes into the immediate area of 1122 King Road, which is actually on a dead end, and then leaves several times. At approximately 4:05 that morning, the defense car had entered that area, was leaving, stopped at the intersection of King and Queen Road, did a U-turn, and the state's evidence would show that the defendant's car came back and parked behind and above the 1122 King Road residence. The state believes that its evidence would then show that the defendant entered the residence of 1122 through the kitchen sliding door on the back side of the residence, which is the side of the residence that would face the area above where the defendant's car was parked. Defendant entered the residence, went to the third floor, and with a knife, killed Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez. The defendant, as he left that room, for whatever reason, ended up leaving, or the sheath for a K-bar knife was left on the bed next to Madison Mogan's body. And I can jump ahead. That sheath was tested by the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab, and single source male DNA was found on the snap of that sheath, as well as blood from both Kaylee and Madison and other trace evidence. But it's important to note single source male DNA was on the snap of that sheath. The state's evidence would show that Xana Knodel was still awake at this time. In fact, had taken a DoorDash order not long before this started. Her room was not on the third floor. It was on the second floor on the west side. As the defendant was either coming down the stairs or leaving, he encountered Xana, and he ended up killing her, also with a large knife. Ethan Chapin, Xana's boyfriend, was asleep in their bedroom, in her bedroom, and the defendant killed him as well with a large fixed blade knife. Each victim suffered multiple wounds. I will state for the record that there is no evidence there was any sexual component or sexual assault on any of the victims. I want to make that clear so there's no speculation. There were two other roommates in the house, and they were already asleep. During the course of this, one of those roommates awoke, looked out her door not knowing what was going on, and saw the defendant, who was dressed in black with a black balaclava on, holding some sort of container in his hand. And she saw him leave the house through the direction of the kitchen where that sliding door is that I mentioned before. At approximately 4:20 that morning, so this would have been 15 minutes or so later, defendant's car is seen on a surveillance camera for 1112 King Road, which is immediately next door to the west of 1122, leaving the area at a high rate of speed. And if the court were to see that, or anybody in this courtroom would see that, you can see the car almost loses control as it makes the corner, heads north, and then turns to go south on Walinta, which is one of the only ways to get out of that part of town. The evidence would show that following that, the defendant in his Elantra drove south of Moscow. We know that he drove on the back roads because there are surveillance cameras on the main highways, Highway 95, that would have picked up the defendant's car if he'd gone that route. And they did not show the defendant's car on that route during the time. So we know that he went through a variety of back roads in very rural, isolated part of Latah County. About 4:48 that morning, defendant's phone comes back on. And the evidence will show that that phone was located south of Moscow, likely at a side road intersection with Highway 95. From there, the defendant's phone activity tracks heading back north towards Pullman, Washington, where the defendant lived. About 5:26, starting approximately 5:26, various surveillance cameras in Pullman, Washington pick up the defendant's vehicle as he enters Pullman from the south and heads north and slightly west towards his apartment, where he arrived at approximately 5:30 in the morning. Later that morning, Sunday, the 13th of November of 2022, Mr. Kohberger's phone returned to the area of King Road. We don't know exactly what he did, but it returned to that area. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. He was there for about 10 minutes and then returned to his Pullman residence. About 9:30, the state's evidence will show, evidence taken from the defendant's phone, that he took a selfie of himself on his phone in what appears to be the bathroom of his Pullman apartment with a thumbs up. The defendant's phone then went to the Lewiston-Clarkston Valley, approximately 30 miles south of Moscow and Pullman. And the defendant is actually seen with his car at various businesses down there. This area is the confluence of the Clearwater River and the Snake River. Lewiston is Idaho's seaport. Large bodies of moving water down there. In addition to tracing the defendant's activities, as I've just outlined, on the 13th and leading up to the 13th, the state's evidence will show that following Sunday, November 13th, 2022, business records show that the defendant began searching for a K-bar knife and a K-bar knife sheath, as the state believes, to replace the one that was left at the scene of the murders. The evidence also will suggest that there were at least attempts by the defendant to delete or alter his purchase history on Amazon, where all these transactions had occurred. Later that week, the state's evidence will show that Mr. Kohberger went to what we would call DMV, motor vehicle licensing here in Idaho, in Pullman, to change his car registration from Pennsylvania to Washington. That's of note because Pennsylvania cars do not require a front license plate. The vehicles seen on the surveillance cameras of the defendant's car showed it didn't have a front license plate on it. At the time of the traffic stop by Deputy Duke in August, it was Pennsylvania plate, no front license plate. Mr. Kohberger proceeded to finish his semester of studies at Washington State University and returned to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Law enforcement at this point were aware of Mr. Kohberger, had been accessing information about him, were trying to find him. They located him in Pennsylvania, and they conducted what's called a trash pull. During the nighttime hours, agents of the FBI, who assisted immensely with this case, working with the sanitation department back in this neighborhood in Pennsylvania, took trash that had been set out on the street for collection, sent the contents of that from the Pennsylvania residence of the defendant's parents to the Idaho State Forensic Laboratory, where the lab experts there were able to identify DNA on a Q-tip as coming from the father of the person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath that was next to Madison Logan's body in the bed. Subsequently, an arrest warrant was issued here in Idaho, and a search warrant was issued in the state of Pennsylvania with the assistance not only of the FBI, but the Pennsylvania State Police. Mr. Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home to return to Idaho. Upon his return to Idaho, a DNA sample was taken from him, and it matched the DNA found on the knife sheath next to Maddie's body at the crime scene. I can tell the court, and the public, the weapon itself, the knife, has not yet been recovered. I can tell the court that the defendant's apartment in Pullman was searched, as well as his office. Spartan would be a kind characterization. There was virtually nothing there. Nothing of evidentiary value was found. And of course, we are now talking 6-8 weeks after the time of the killings. In Pennsylvania, the defendant's car was seized, and it was actually pretty much disassembled internally. And it also had been cleaned. There was a bucket of cleaner right beside it. I think we can all look to our own cars, you know, in those compartments in the doors. We try to keep them clean where you put stuff. There's always some degree of crud in there. They were spotless. The defendant's car had been meticulously cleaned inside. And the state would present to the jury that that was part of the defendant's plan in covering up this. The defendant has studied crime. In fact, he did a detailed paper on crime scene processing when he was working on his pre-doctorate degrees, and he had that knowledge and skill. So, Your Honor, at the end, the state submits the evidence that I've given just a quick overview of, and that to present in court would consume weeks, which the state is prepared to do and has been prepared to do, would show that as the defendant has just admitted and pleaded guilty on November 13th, 2022, excuse me, Mr. Kohberger entered the residence of 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. He did that with the intent to kill. We will not represent that he intended to commit all of the murders that he did that night, but we know that that is what resulted, and that he then killed intentionally, willfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice forethought, Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Santa Cruz. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, based on the state's proffer and importantly, based upon defendant's explicit admission to committing these crimes, the court finds there is a factual basis. Therefore, with respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 2, murder in the first degree, as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogen, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Gonzalez, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Right. The court will find that the defendant understands the nature of the charges and each offense and the possible consequences to him of his guilty plea. The court finds that there is a factual basis for the plea and that finds the defendant believes the plea to be in his best interest. I find that the plea was given freely, voluntarily, and was intelligently made. I accept the plea. I direct that it be entered. I'll continue the matter for sentencing in this case. I think it was mentioned on the call Monday afternoon, the defense wishes to waive a pretrial investigation. Is that accurate?
Yes, Your Honor.
The state also?
Yes, Your Honor. The state does not believe pre-sentence investigation is needed, given the evidence that is available. We want to, though, make sure that all of the victims have the opportunity to make statements to the court at sentencing.
Absolutely. And certainly both the state and the defense may present whatever sentencing memorandum and other documents you wish me to consider. The victims will be given an opportunity to provide the statements that they wish to at sentencing. Do we need more than one full day for sentencing?
I do not believe so, Your Honor. Obviously we have numerous victims, and we have victims who share unique perspectives on this, and we want to make sure that they all have time to express their feelings to the court. But I believe that if we can start perhaps 8:30 or so in the morning, that we should be able to complete it all in one day.
Defense agree with that in terms of the time frame?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So as it happens, we have some time reserved in this case in July and August. The week of July 22nd is available. I don't know if that's too soon for the parties or the next week, the week of August 4 is available. Any preference?
Your Honor, we're prepared as soon as the court wants to schedule it.
The state, I believe, would be prepared on the 22nd. We've told the victims' families that we're looking at approximately those dates.
All right. So because of the plan to bring in so many jurors to fill out questionnaires, I had ordered that no other trials could take place in this courthouse the week of July 22nd. And so we will use that in terms of the sentencing date because of what I'm sure will be the significant interest of the media and the public and the logistics that will be required to make that happen. Without trials going, it'll be a lot easier to do that. So let's pick that week. Why don't we pick July 23rd with the idea that if for some reason we don't finish, we could continue into the 24th. We'll start at 9 in the morning. Does that give your team enough time, Sandra? 9 in the morning? All right. Any concerns with that date?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
No, sir.
All right. Any reason why I should not rescind the non-dissemination order at this time?
You're right. I think that given the history of this case, it would be best if that remained in place through sentencing. So we have time to make sure there's the ability to completely answer questions. That would be the state's preference and recommendation.
Would have no objection for the order to remain in place through sentencing.
All right. I will, at this point, the idea to keep it until sentencing, which time it would be withdrawn in order to give the parties the space and time to prepare to meet what I'm sure will be the deluge of media requests. That's at least my preliminary decision at this point. We can always revisit if it seems to be, for some reason, I should. That said. Obviously, I don't think the defendant, a bond was ever set for the defendant. Were it would be revoked. The prior order allowing him to come in civilian clothes is revoked, given his plea and no longer the presumption of innocence. And in fact, now the actual conviction for the crimes. He will continue to be held at the jail pending sentencing. Is there anything else today?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
I assume that the trial date will be vacated.
trial
and those
is-
4 jurors will be released.
The trial will be vacated, and I'm sure that the jury commissioner will get word to those that receive their summons that they won't be required to attend. So
Thank you.
that said, again, if you would all please wait for the parties and the victims' families and others to leave the courtroom before you do, I would appreciate it. And with that, we're adjourned. All right, please.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't think any huge surprises, but the emotional nature of hearing the murderer, the quadruple murderer, and now we can call him the murderer because he's
Right.
convicted. He's convicted of it. And even Bill Thompson, the district attorney, in his last sentence, he was breaking into tears. You could hear his voice crack. And I guess that's when it hit him that these 4 people were murdered by this guy and he's guilty. And all the evidence, and he knew he was all prepared to go to trial. But to be in this courtroom, to hear this, and just really, Bryan Kohberger was pretty damn unemotional. You know, a lot of the allocution, if you could call it that, was just him saying yes.
Right.
Yes, you know. And the judge had to, of course, cover every area so that there'll be no doubt that he did this. I used to call it Vic, voluntarily, intentionally, and knowingly, and
Right.
he covered that and covered that each one of these people, he knew that he murdered each one of them. And he entered 1122 King Road with the intention of murdering them. He entered 1122 King Road with the intention of committing a burglary, which is, of course, we spoke about before, knowingly and unlawfully enter or remain in a building with intent to commit a crime therein. The crime that he intended to commit was murder. Now, we may never learn, we won't learn from the mouth of the perpetrator what his motive was, but we heard the state present their evidence. And I'm a little shocked that there was no forensic evidence inside his apartment. But you heard Bill Thompson say he meticulously cleaned his car. He meticulously cleaned his apartment. And he said it was Spartan-like, meaning there was basically not much in his apartment. And we also know that bleach kills DNA. So, of course, the defendant, and now that not the defendant, the convicted murderer, knew that. And he killed the DNA or whatever was left inside his car. If there was any blood evidence or DNA, he meticulously cleaned it and killed it with bleach. So all of these things, and in fact, his preparation and his diligence in trying to get away with this crime, he was awfully close to it. However, that DNA on the knife sheath, and I said numerous times while covering this case, was the smoking gun, Mike. Mike, I'm so interested in hearing your takeaway from hearing this. And it was very sort of procedural. It was procedural. There was all that much emotion. The next one, and I believe that the judge, Hippler, said on July 23rd and 24th, he reserved 2 days for the sentencing and also to allow the families to give their impact statements. That is going to be the day or the days where emotion is going to come out in this case, Mike.
Yeah, Bill, I was hoping that the judge would go a little bit more into, the why, but, he didn't. And once I saw that he wasn't going to do it, I realized it's not going to happen. And I felt bad about that because I do want to know why. But he was procedural. He was careful. He made sure he covered everything several times over with the burglary. You intended to enter that place at 1122, that residence, with the intent to commit murder. You then committed the murders. So he was asked several times. He pled guilty to that. And that was fantastic. And I was very glad that Bill Thompson was able to stand up in open court. And because this is what I alluded to before. I want the public to know all that they had on him. Now, he read from a prepared script about all the things that they would have had to show to a jury. And I thought that was fantastic. It shows the amount of police work that was done. It shows that technology like Ring doorbell cameras, DNA, was amazing and the cell phone tower, the pinging locations that he was going by that area about 23 times between, it's like 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. I don't care that it's a very densely populated place. There was never anything that Ann Taylor would say anywhere that would explain 23 visits. So somewhere it looks like from July 9th, I believe, or somewhere in the early July, like July 9th, that he first began getting that idea that he was going to kill these particular people. We'll never know exactly when the plan was formulated or why it was formulated. And the only time that he'll get a chance to speak is at sentencing. The judge will ask him to stand up and, do you have anything to say before I sentence you? My money is that Kohberger will say, no, I have nothing to say. And I think that's how it's going to end. It won't be satisfying to a lot of people. It won't be satisfying to me as a parent and as a law enforcement officer, as an attorney. But unfortunately, I think that's how it's going to end. Let's hope that there's an opening for some discussion, but at that hearing, but I don't think so.
You know, Mike, I sort of think that, I would have loved for them to be able to recover the knife. And I don't think that's even going to be addressed. But he obviously got rid of the knife in some way. If he meticulously cleaned his house, his car, and even when he got to Pennsylvania in December, he was still cleaning and getting rid of things.
Right.
So we'll never find out. We just all have to accept the fact that he got rid of the knife. Now, it's really not important that the riffraff that has been following this, and that's a kind word, following this case, that still will not be satisfied that he pled guilty. Vic, remember this, riffraff, Vic, voluntarily, intelligently, and knowingly, he just pled guilty. That is the requirements of the law. Whether you content creators out there who are just going for clicks to take the opposite of reason and of intelligence, whether you want to keep insisting that he didn't do this, have a nice life. He did this. He just pled guilty to 4 murders and 1 burglary, right? And we're not going to hear his motive. We would all love to hear that. We would all love to hear the why, but that's not a requirement of murder. And you could see the tension inside that courtroom. Judge Hippler, I thought, did an excellent presentation, but it was by the book. It was by rote. He was reading the questions. And Bryan Kohberger was responding in 1-word answers, yes. Wouldn't you love to know what's in his warped, disgusting, criminal mind that made this piece of garbage do this? And I will call him what he is now, because he's no longer has the presumption of innocence. He no longer has that. He just pled guilty to 4 murders. Capital case. He spared his miserable life from the death penalty. Is his family, or are his family victims also? Yes. I feel for them also. But to me, the families of the victims are the true victims. Besides the victims themselves, the families of the victims really are the ones that suffered the most in this case, and not Kohberger and not his family, but the victims. And you see them up on the screen: Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. Those families are the victims. And let's hope each and every one of these families sends a representative on July 23rd and July 24th to give what's known as an impact statement. And even if this guy has no feelings, he's so warped in his brain that he doesn't give a shit, I hope one of the families can get to point a finger in his face and tell him what a despicable piece of garbage he is. Mike?
Yeah, Bill, as strange it is as it is, he's going to face the music and hear from all of the family members of those poor 4 young people that he killed. And he may feel no sympathy. He may be bored. You don't know what's going on in his warped little mind. He may be cold as ice. You don't know. But the weird thing is, and I hope he would realize it, is that if he had been the victim of a violent crime, and that perpetrator was caught, his father and his mother would be up at that podium with tears in their eyes, telling the judge how much Bryan had meant to them, and that that killer took Bryan's life. That's the weird thing about it, is that he may not understand a person's value to their family and how far that damage that he did goes. It's like dropping a stone in a still pond. Those ripples go out to every single member of that family. So not only did you kill that one person, but you irreparably damaged so many people in that family. And so the weird thing is that his family, if the roles reversed, they'd be crying over him. I don't think it'll ever penetrate his brain, because I don't think he has that ability, his personality, to feel empathy. I hope he will feel some sort of guilt, some sort of remorse. I don't think so, but I would love for that to torture him for the rest of his life. I don't think it'll happen, but I would wish that on him, that he would be tortured every day thinking that what he did was he became a monster.
Mike, as much as we as retired law enforcement investigators, we accept this plea and we realize, yeah, he did it. He was not going to plead guilty. And look, hearing the evidence from Bill Thompson, guess what? There was some room to create doubt there. There was room for a good attorney to create doubt. But rolling the dice that if he lost and Taylor lost the case and he got convicted after trial, he had the firing squad to face, or the potential firing squad. They were not willing to take that chance. So Ann Taylor, as a professional attorney, accepted to the bar, goes to her client. First, apparently goes to the prosecution and requests the plea. What would you do? What kind of plea bargain would you give us? And the plea, as we all know, was 4 counts of murder first degree, life without parole. What bothered a lot of people I saw in the chat was that he has to serve at least 10 years consecutively on each murder. But I mean, then what does life without parole mean? I sometimes the law always puts an excuse in there somewhere, you know? So he would have to do 40 years, right? He's what, 30 years old, 31 years old?
31, 30.
So that makes us feel good, but we don't ever want to see this guy see the light of day. We want him we want him to die in prison, you know? And I think that's the reason why a lot of people wanted to see this case go to trial, because they wanted a lot of answers. That some of them were answered today, not all. But now we don't have to roll the dice that he could beat this case after a trial. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. Mike, I know we've been on the air for 2 hours and 1 minute, so I want to give you your final thoughts. And thank you for sitting through the whole thing with me.
No problem. I wouldn't miss this for the world. I think people should, anyone who had any doubts whatsoever about the case against Bryan Kohberger, lay those to rest. He did it. He admitted to it. There was a boatload of evidence against him, truckloads of evidence against him, and a little bit of justice, not a lot, but a little bit of justice was served today. So that's what we got so far.
You know, I think so. And again, we always have to mention in this case what this case is about and who it was about. And it's for these 4 people up on the screen: Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. And they should have never have lost their lives. So do we have a little bit of justice? Not total justice. Do we have a little bit? Well, he's guilty. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. But you can't even imagine how the Gonzalez family feels. They're the most vocal that were against him getting this plea. Anyway, folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. On behalf of myself, Professor Mike Geary, thank you so much for listening today. And the other thing is thank you so much for following us on this case since November 13th, 2022. And if I had to pat myself on the back, I would say we did a pretty damn good job covering this case, because there were a lot of psychotics that covered this case that have no clue, and they're still doing it. They're still doing it. And those are the people I shake my head at. But the channel of reason, that's what I'll call us. Anyway, Mike, thank you also for helping me and Police Off the Cuff be a channel of reason.
You got it.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.